On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Ramiro Berrelleza. He's the founder and CEO of Okteto. We're going to be talking about building software cheaper and faster. And what do I mean about that? Well, costs are changing, shifting in terms of how quickly developers are able to simplify, get up with new tools, improve their productivity. But we also factor in feedback loops. We're going to talk about the impact of GitHub Copilot-like tools and how those are going to impact your team's ability to develop and deliver. And we'll see how much more we can fit in. Ramiro, I appreciate your time. Thanks for being on.
Hey, Amir. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Awesome. All right. Before we start, just to make sure if people aren't aware of what your company Okteto does, let everyone know what you guys do.
Yeah, of course. So at Okteto, we're building a platform to automate development workflows in Kubernetes. With our platform, you can move your workloads, your services, databases, everything you normally run on your laptop while developing into the cloud. So it's off your computer, it's not consuming resources, and it's fully automated. So you can focus on what matters, which is, coding cool stuff and creating business value rather than spending your day manually setting up environments.
All right. Well, I'm sure that's going to impact developers' ability to produce cheaper and faster. And that's the theme of the podcast. When we talk about trying to actually produce software cheaper and faster, there's a lot of conflicting thoughts I have, because obviously you always hear good, cheap, fast, and you can't have all three. But we are seeing some changes in the software development process. Obviously, simplifying your development process is what everyone's hoping to do. Become as efficient as possible to speed up, but not to leave any room for errors, which is, the art. And I mean, obviously there's science. Tell us, when we're talking about trying to do this and produce cheaper and faster, what does that actually mean?
You're spot on. I've seen this a lot where just going for cheaper rarely results in a good thing. One of my most magical things about our business software is that you only have to build things once, and then you can serve, once, and you can serve thousands, even millions of customers, right? Like, it's not like manufacturing where you build, you need to build, if you're selling, cars, you need to build as many cars as you need to sell. Software, you can replicate easily. So cheaper, to me, takes a different dimension. I think more than cheaper, the way I like to describe this is focused. When you're building a team, or you have a team and you're looking into making it more effective, there's two areas that you have to focus on. One is, are you spending your time doing the right thing? Because what I've seen, and that's one of the main reasons why I started Okteto, was a lot of teams are just spending a lot of time on non-core activities. In our case, setting up environments by hand, or waiting for CI to run and tell your result, because you can't run these things on your own. That is a lot of time. So the first thing you have to look into is hey, how can I remove this so that my developers spend most of the time on this kind of focus stage? And you'll be surprised of how much time is lost. Like, a lot of the teams we work with, it's not about having less people for the sake of it. I mean, there are economics pressures, but it's also about, hey, now that my developers are not spending hours waiting for CI, they can do so much more. So the output becomes cheaper, because the same 50, 100, 20 engineers are now producing twice as much. So that, to me, is one of my favorite ways of measuring this. Is not by how much can you cut expenses, but how much can you increase your yield and your productivity. And, you do have to look at expenses. Like, that's something very important to keep an eye on how much it's costing you to create software. But really, I like when the conversation moves towards efficiency, focus, getting more bang for the buck, as they say here in the US.
Absolutely. I mean, when we talk about, let's say we're looking at the cheaper, right? And there's multiple factors of what we can look at when we're talking about making something less expensive. Obviously, people resources is one, infrastructure resources, efficiency gains, which are harder to quantify in terms of pure dollars and cents. When you're looking at a team and you're like, hey, we want to help them, reduce cost, where do they typically see that cost reduction?
It's interesting because what you're saying is like it's harder to measure. It's true. The ROI of efficiency, it is harder to measure. A lot of people we see try to go for the easier metrics, like, hey, how much money am I spending per month? So the first thing we help them with is by moving them to this automated way of doing, in our case, ephemeral environments, we show them how they can save money because, for instance, they're no longer having to run environments all day. They're automated. You put them on a schedule. Some of our customers shut down their environments at 8 p.m. Then the next day at 9 a.m., spin them up again. And you're already saving 50% of your developer infra because it's not running idle overnight. Or by having tooling that automates, we call it garbage collecting of like cloud resources. You don't have databases running for months without anybody using them. So that's one of the first things we do is really help them find this rogue resources that are running forever. That's something that every company worked at. Microsoft, Atlassian, small startups, Okteto. We've always found a lot of dollars just by looking into, hey, let's automate the creation and destruction of environments, of cloud resources. That is kind of like the first thing that we show them. And that's something that is one of our most popular features, especially in larger organizations. The other cost savings that I've seen that works really well is sizing things correctly for the environment. Like you don't need the biggest RDS instance for dev. You might need it for production. Sure, you might need it for your stress load testing. But you don't need every developer to have this large database running. And that's where, there's a lot of like buzz now around platform engineering. But one of the better things about platform engineering is that with the proper platform, you can give your developers a very clear sandbox of like, hey, this is what you have access to. This types of database, this size of VM, this cluster. So that's a big savings there as well, because going from whatever the name is, but going from an extra large RDS instance to a small instance, it's thousands of dollars a month. And developers don't want to think about these things. You just want to like, hey, I need a database. I don't care, just the one that is good for me. So taking these decisions outside of the developer, centralizing it on a policy, something that's easy to automate and to govern, frees up a lot of dollars. And then finally, like reducing all this toil around manual setup, maintaining environments is a great way to also repurpose some of your human resources. I don't like that word, but some of your engineers. Because rather than requiring, 5 engineers to keep all your environments, if it's fully automated, maybe you only need 2, which means the other 3 engineers can now be put on a feature team and build more value. And that way, you're also shifting dollars from pure cost to revenue generating activities. So those 3 for me is one of the first things that we see. We're privileged that we get a chance to talk to a bunch of different dev teams, and you kind of see the trends and you see what they're great at and where they're struggling. And these 3 things tend to be one of those low-hanging fruits. Then you get into efficiencies, and that's where like DORA metrics and space and other methodologies can help you understand the ROI of a bigger or a larger team. But those 3 things definitely is easy things you can check. You don't need tooling. Tooling makes it easier, but as long as you check and you come to an agreement with your team, you can save a lot of dollars just by sizing it correctly and not keep things running overnight by default.
And that's great. And I guess that makes sense because that seems like there's some simple things you could do. Like you said, you don't even need to go invest. It's actually paying attention. That right sizing component, I think, is very important. When you do want to start investing in tools because you want to, again, go back to empowering your developers, you want them to have improved productivity, which hopefully will result in faster. But again, might not work in the favor of cheaper unless you can measure efficiency. When you're kind of looking at that balance of, empowering developers with more tools, providing them with more productivity tools and that type of thing. What's the balance? Like, how do you find a balance of going, the developers are optimally efficient, because any more and potentially you're not going to get a return on that investment any less, and you're wondering, have I done enough?
Yeah, that is a great thing to question, because I think there is such a thing as like tool overload. And I've worked for teams where we're all well intentioned, we bring tools, set up things, and then you have so much tooling that you get lost and you're actually losing productivity because the tools are getting in the way. For me, there's this company called dx.com, and they have the model where you have surveys. And I have to say that over the past few years, the way I feel about developer surveys has a 180. I used to be like, oh yeah, surveys, whatever, they don't help. Now I'm actually a big fan. Like, you do a survey, every 3 months, 6 months, and you ask your developers, what gets in the way of you doing work? And it's amazing the results you get, especially if you keep asking the same questions, time period of like once per quarter, every 6 months. You can start to see these patterns like, hey, what gets in the way? And through that, you can get a good sense of like, hey, which tools are getting in the way, or which process is getting in the way. And that will give you a good idea of what tools to implement. Like asking developers, even if it's just kind of, hey, doing like a listening tour where like you just go around and sit with everybody or over Zoom, say, hey, what gets in the way? What do you hate about our, I always like to ask those kind of like very pointed, what do you hate? What do you love, to kind of create a reaction? Because the developers tend to be very opinionated. I am for sure. And you kind of get the reaction, you get them going, oh my God, this sucks and this other thing's amazing, but this is super slow. And that gives you a good sense. Because we have to be careful. Like one thing that we always forget, like most tools add cognitive load. Like part of what we do at Okteto is kind of like giving you the automation so that you can hide most of these tools from everybody, so they don't have to pay for the cognitive load unless they need to. But having too many tools, different ways to deploy, to edit code, if you have to do all these manual things, there's some more things you have to keep in your head. So it's very important to be very agile, I would say, on your tool picking, and also not being shy about removing tools that are not working, that people are no longer using or getting in the way. Platform teams are now more prominent. And one of the things we all have to learn is to act like almost like product companies. Like the offering that you give your developers, you have to monitor, what do they like? What are they not using? And remove it, because otherwise you're going to end up with this, 100-headed beast that just makes everybody's life harder. So that's something that it requires discipline. It's not easy, but I think it's very important.
And that's actually really insightful. I was going to ask you, we're seeing a lot of buzz around tools that help engineers, such as, let's say a GitHub Copilot helps them produce some pieces of code. And we see people even going at ChatGPT trying to do the same. Developers are very resourceful in leveraging Stack Overflow, Google, to solve problems they run into. It's known. Why reinvent the wheel if somebody else can give you a bit of it? And now we're seeing the emergence of more of these tools that actually have more capability. I guess when we're talking about trying to lower the cost of making software and doing it faster, how do you kind of see these type of tools fitting in within the overall development process?
I think they're amazing. Like I've been in the AI ML space for a while, more as something I just am interested in, not really as a practitioner. When I was in college, I did some early like AI work, and I'm fascinated by how well they work. And I think the comparison you made with Stack Overflow is great. I think that's a good way for kind of like remove the mystique and the fear around Copilot or Cody or any of the other code generators. To me, it's just a better, more efficient kind of Stack Overflow way. I think that I've been using it lately, and having that, and I love the name Copilot because I think that represents really well the relationship. Like, they're not writing code for you. It's a Copilot. It's a resource that you can like use to help you generate certain things. Like I use it a lot for the boring, very repetitive things. Like I was writing a demo and I needed to like write this service that was gonna like write a file, put some data on it, and then push it to an S3 bucket on AWS. There's nothing innovative about that. I could have spent a couple hours browsing, trying to find the right sample, the API, because I forgot how to use, Python and Boto and all those things. Or, hey, Copilot, I'm trying to do this. And you get something that it wasn't perfect, but it was like 85% there. And that saved me an hour, maybe two, of me iterating and trying to find. So that to me is amazing. I think it's something that all teams need to consider. Like, use these tools. But like any other tool, there's a lot of buzz, a lot of hype. There's no silver bullet. That old book still applies. There's no silver bullet. There's no one thing will fix everything. But it is helpful and it's an accelerator. Like it's not going to remove. You still have to think. You still have to solve problems. But to me, it's a great accelerator of the fact that our job as developers is not to write code. It's to solve business problems through technology. So if you can spend less time typing and more time problem solving, that's good for you. That's good for your business, and that's good for your customers. And that's where you go from, hey, you know what? I can do 2-3 times more than before. I can ship code faster. I can iterate on solutions with my customers faster and easier. And that is a lot more valuable for a business than having a developer spending half or twice as much manually typing everything because they don't want to use this new technology. It has a place. It's not for everything, but I think it's fascinating, and I'm very excited of what's going to happen. I mean, it's been a year since ChatGPT was publicly available, and we're seeing these amazing things. I can't imagine in 2 or 3 years where this is going to go.
Let me ask you this question. This has come up a couple times because as we're talking about, the one component of feedback and feedback loops within the development process, right? Who doesn't want to make it less expensive? I don't like the word cheaper because it's always difficult to ascertain, but we want to reduce the cost in development. We'd love to ship faster, get code. I mean, that's where the technology's gone. Feedback is an interesting thing to talk about here because typically the engineering team is not isolated. They're removed from that direct feedback, right? So they're a little bit by proxy. There might be a customer success team. There might be a product person. There's a layer there that exists, and it can be done very well. But also, if we go back over the last 50 years of software's history, the requirement feedback loop as it comes down to the engineering always is different than what's heard firsthand. It's just we've seen all the cartoon images of the chair requirements as it gets to the engineering team. What do you make of the feedback loop in that separation? Because you said something interesting about giving engineers more time to solve business problems, but this feedback loop component is critical.
It is. I think is the most important aspect of software development. I think that the reason why startups tend to beat incumbents, in my experience and opinion, is because that feedback loop is so fast. And a lot of that is because startups have less gatekeeping around who talks to customers. Like my company, it's something we push hard as part of our culture is, hey, engineers, join. We use Slack for customer success. We have pretty much a Slack channel with almost each of our customers. And we push hard, hey, developers, go join the channel and have the discussion there. Talk to the customer directly. They reported this issue. Go see the conversation. Product, join the customer success calls so you can get firsthand what's going on. I think that is crucial because I've worked in large organizations where the separation is far. And then when you're building something, you're like, I don't know why they're asking for this. It makes no sense. But then when you actually talk to a customer, you're like, oh, of course. Makes sense because what you need is X, Y, Z. And actually what you really need is this other thing. So I think that's something that technology can help us. I actually gave a talk on this at CubeCon earlier this year about how the idea of this ephemeral environments that you can share with your customers early on the cycles, how by not having to wait until you release code, but getting your customers involved earlier is a good way to break these walls and having them be part of the software development process. Like the other day, it happened to me where like FedEx, the credit card company, they asked me, say, hey, you know what? We have this new feature. Would you like to like see like a preview? I was like, oh yeah, of course. And then I got on a Zoom call with them and they had this link that I could like access and actually use this feature on like a separate FedEx instance. It was clearly demo with demo data, not my data, but I could actually use it and they could see and hear me complain, oh yeah, this is useful. I don't think about this. You know, I have these other problems. And in the call, it was me, the customer success person, of course, but somebody from product and somebody from engineering. And that just short circuits the process. And I'm sure they're building a better solution than what they would if they had sent me a survey or a call. And then the customer success person summarizes this for product, who then writes all the Jira tickets for development. It's just night and day. And I think that's something that technology makes it more available, easier. You know, we have a lot of tooling for telemetry, for session recording, for recording interviews, for recording sales calls, and they're very cheap and available. I think all that is helping us, but developers talking to customers, I think, is fundamental for having a better feedback loop. Because when we go back to like talking about cheaper, there's nothing more expensive than having to redo the same feature 2 or 3 times because you got it wrong. And sometimes a 1-hour conversation with a customer will save you months of iteration because you kind of get the real pain. And that to me is something that is fundamental. And I think more and more leaders get it. And I think it's changing how we build software. Also moving from, you know, waterfall to agile now to like more like SaaS, shipping things every day makes it a lot easier. But it's definitely something that I think all tech leaders need to have in mind. And how can you speed up this feedback loop? I think that is the best optimization you can make to a team. If you want a cheap team, the closer they are to customers, the faster, the leaner, the better things will be.
And interestingly, you know, the smaller the startup, the earlier the stage of startup, the CTO or one of the founding engineers typically is really close to the customer. Like you were just saying, you know, as a company grows, there's layers and structure and distance that's created. That early on, you know, when the CTO is pretty much that feedback loop, they're the ones on the calls, they'd hear everything. That you could see that iteration, the speed, the product development. I mean, there are forward deploy engineers that some companies, you know, use that might be a little bit more with integration, right? When we're talking about this feedback loop to bring back those requirements to the customer, to the engineering team, you know, I guess traditionally between customer and product teams, there's that layer. Is that forward deployed engineer or somebody from the engineering team being more integrated with those teams, or maybe being more of a hub and spoke embedded model? Is that something you see that could potentially bridge that gap as companies grow and those layers become deeper and deeper?
Oh yeah, 100%. That to me is one of my most fascinating roles. Like, because you're right, as companies grow, it's a function of a scale, right? Like when you're early, you have 10 customers, you can be in all 10 calls. As you grow, you have hundreds, hopefully thousands of customers at some point. You have to figure it out. But I think there are companies where they keep this ethos, and you'll see the CTO no longer joining every call, of course, but like joining some critical calls, maybe VIP customers. And it becomes a cultural thing because it doesn't have to be the CTO. It can be the PM for that product. It can be the lead developer for a specific feature. I think it's one of a culture thing. But I think that the forward deploy engineer is a genius move to create that culture, because you have people sitting there next to developers, next to like their users. And I think this is something especially works really well when you're building like developer tools or business tools, where you can sit next to the person who's going to be using it. Because you can be that hub that communicates and shares, and it becomes almost like the ambassador, the advocate of the user for the company as much as advocating on behalf of the company for the end user. And that is a virtuous cycle where I think everything is aligned. Because, developers want to work on cool things. We don't like to work on features that nobody's going to use. Like, you want to know, hey, who's using it and how and why. So if you create that cycle, you create the right channels to make sure the communication happens. That's amazing. Like, I've seen companies that they bring customers to talk at all hands, or they'll fly a customer for like their yearly company meeting just to share how they use a product. Atlassian used to do this, and that was always like super exciting. And I think all those channels can be created, whether you're a startup or a public company in the Fortune 500. I think it's more of a culture than a function of a scale.
Interesting. I like it. I was actually, looking at kind of where I'd like to take the conversation. I'm like, I could keep asking you questions, but I know you got to get back to actually running the business. So I'm gonna wrap it up with you and let you get back to it. But before I do, if somebody does want to reach out to you, maybe they want to find out more about Okteto, they want to touch on something we talk about, building, a less expensive, more efficient, faster, all those different components. What is a good way of getting a hold of you?
Yeah, so Okteto.com. If you go there, you can book a call with us. I'm always happy to, give a demo or talk about these challenges. Actually, we're doing a promotion where if one of your listeners emails us to podcasts@okteto.com, we'll set up a session with you, not to talk about Okteto, but to talk about your challenges around developer experience, options to innovate. Like I take some of those calls where I'm happy to share experience. So that's something we're doing for listeners. And for something less formal, I'm always on Twitter. I'm a big fan of, I guess, X now, x.com and Mastodon. If you search for Ramiro Berrelleza, it'll pop up. I'm always happy to engage and share and learn from others on the challenges and fun parts of building software in a way that is cheaper, more effective, and solving customers' pains.
Awesome. Ramiro, thanks for taking the time. Thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing.
No, thanks, Amir. It was wonderful. Love the conversation, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. I'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, share the episode. I thought, great insights from Ramiro. Fantastic topic. I appreciate everything he did. And share with somebody else who's going to benefit from this podcast episode. Also, like, subscribe, leave me a review. Let me know if you want me to find a different guest to talk about a specific topic. I'll do my best. But until next time, thank you and goodbye.